Now this is something a bit rare, a peated single malt from Ireland that comes in at cask strength. This week let me tell you about the Big Smoke from Teeling Irish Whiskey. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm the whiskey nerd, and like I said, this week I'm looking at the Big Smoke cask strength peated single malt from Teeling. So let me get it into the glass and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Now, this is not the real name of this whiskey, Big Smoke. It's actually called the Blackpitts cask strength Irish whiskey. The Blackpitts comes from the area where the Teeling distillery is in Dublin. It's called the Blackpitts, but the kind of nickname they've given this whiskey is the Big Smoke because Dublin's kind of nickname as a city is the Big Smoke. So when they released their cask strength Blackpitts peated single malt whiskey, they gave it the nickname Big Smoke, and I think it's a pretty apt name for this whiskey, which is a pretty heavily peated Irish whiskey. Now normally for an Irish whiskey you're not going to get peated notes in the whiskey because for the most part most Irish whiskeys aren't going to be peated. They're not going to be smoky or heavily kind of briny, like that savoury note that you do get with some Scotch whiskies, notably Islay Scotch whiskies. But this is a peated single malt. So for their original kind of Blackpitts basic entry level of the Teeling peated whiskies, what they did was they took the peated malt and then they distilled it 3 different times. So by distilling it 3 times, what happens is you concentrate some flavors, but you also strip away some of those harsh edges at the outside every time you distill something. So when you distill it 3 times, you strip away a lot of the kind of rougher edges, but sometimes some of those peat smoke, those savory notes hide in those rougher edges. So when they distilled it 3 times, what happened was a lot of that smoke was actually taken away and you got a very lighter, fresher, fruitier whiskey that came across because it was also finished in wine cask, in the Sauternes wine cask. It came across as a kind of a grilled barbecue pineapple. Still some smoke, but also quite sweet. This whiskey though is a bit different. So for starters, there's 3 main differences between this version of the Blackpitts and the regular kind of version of the Blackpitts. First off, it comes in at cask strength, which is 56.5% alcohol, so it's going to have a lot more weight, a lot more presence, a lot more kind of richness in the glass. But there's also a couple of other differences which are pretty important. First off, it was not aged in Sauternes wine casks, it was only bourbon casks, so you're going to get a lot of the sweetness there from the bourbon cask, but you're not going to get those bright, fresh, fruity notes from the Sauternes wine, so it's going to be more of that peat smoke. And to really double down on getting those peat notes through, they only distilled this whiskey twice. So normally Irish whiskey, it's distilled 3 times. There are some double distilled expressions out there. Normally Scotch whiskey distilled twice. There are some triple distills, but by and large, as a rule of thumb, you can kind of say Irish is distilled 3 times, Scotch whiskey is distilled twice. This whiskey though was distilled twice, and like I said, when you distill something, you kind of subtract some flavors, you concentrate others, but you subtract others. This whiskey was only distilled twice, so it's going to have more of that funk, more of that kind of smoky, earthy, really kind of like that briny note, maybe a bit of savoury characteristic coming through than you would get in the regular cask version of the Blackpitts. So it is going to be quite a different whiskey. It is, as I said, coming in at cask strength with natural colour and non-chill filtered, but there's one little thing here. It doesn't say if Teeling distilled it themselves. Now, Teeling have been distilling at the Dublin distillery for a few years now, so they have got some nice aged stock and they have been phasing in their own distillate into some of their lines, like their single malt, in their other whiskies, in their pot still whiskies as well. They don't say that this was distilled by themselves. Now, the press release that came around it does make it seem like it was distilled by themselves. It does say on the whiskey bottle that it was crafted by the Teeling Whiskey Distillery in Dublin. So not 100% transparent there if it was all their whiskey, but it does look like it is their own whiskey. So let's go in for the nose on the Teeling Blackpitts Big Smoke cask strength version. Cheers. Okay, jumping out of the glass, you get that peat smoke. I mean, it is called the Big Smoke for a reason. I mean, like I said, it is kind of, for those of you who aren't familiar with Dublin's kind of skyline, these are the Poolbeg chimney towers at an old power station that used to power downtown Dublin. I'll put a picture down up here of what this looks like and what those chimney towers look like, but they're kind of an iconic part of Dublin's landscape that maybe helped shape its nickname Big Smoke. And coming out of the glass, it is a very smoky whiskey. Like, you get, obviously there's still sweetness in here, there's a lot of sweetness coming out of the glass with the vanilla, but it's earthy, it's kind of old leather that's been worked a bit. There's earthy smoke, there's that little bit of a savory note that I do get on some whiskeys. It's kind of like a cured meats, like where you get that salami that's been heavily smoked, still has some sweetness in it. There's a name like umami for that savory note, that savory taste you get. That's kind of what I'm getting here, with that kind of like a good, rich, slow burning peat fire. Like, it's not a huge assault of smoke. It's definitely there, it's definitely present. The cask strength is probably kind of letting that shine through a little bit more, but it's not an assault, it's not overpowering. I can still get that that vanilla, I can still get a little bit of kind of like a butterscotch toffee coming through as well, and a little bit of like an appley note. I've had a dessert cooked in a barbecue before where you wrap an apple in like a tin foil and aluminum foil, you put that on the barbecue, you let it smoke up, you let it kind of heat up. That kind of baked apple note is kind of coming through here. It's definitely that kind of like an appley caramelized note coming through. On the nose, I'm getting like a hint of the alcohol, the hint of that ABV. Not a huge amount, like there's just a little bit of like not a burn, but like a tingle coming through here. But yeah, I think it's pretty well incorporated. Nice amount of peat smoke, but not overpowering. So let's go in for the palate and see how strong that peat is. Cheers. Immediately sweet and immediately smoky. Like, the sweetness hit my tongue as it spread out. Big bang of smoke coming through. Big bang of that kind of peaty earthiness, that low mellow smokiness that comes through. Very nice, very richly. As it spreads out, get a little bit of the ABV tingle, a little bit of that heat from the alcohol. Again, pretty well incorporated. It doesn't feel very young. It doesn't feel young at all. Like, if this was Teeling's own distillate, I might expect it to be a little bit younger, but it does feel quite well kind of aged. It does feel like maybe they used very good casks. It came through very well because there's not youthfulness on this whiskey that I do get with some other whiskies from the newer Irish distilleries. This is coming through quite nice, quite aged. A little bit of like a herbal note as I'm breathing, as I'm talking. So I'm gonna go in for a second sip. I'm gonna focus in on more of those flavors from that peat, that earthiness, and see if I can get more of that fruitiness from the nose. Cheers. Yeah, when I swallowed it, I got a little bit of like a herbal note, almost like a mintiness note. Not obviously tasting like a mint, but you know where you get that kind of herbal characteristic of fresh mint. That's kind of what I'm getting, a little bit of a herbal note. So it's a little bit of like almost fresh vegetation rather than that burnt up, dried out peat vegetation, but nice and rich there. A little bit of the fruitiness from the nose is coming back. It's mostly, for me at least, the caramel, the butterscotch, the toffee, with a little bit of an apple at the end in the palate. Again, with that ABV tingle, with that smoke, wrapping everything up, keeping it very nice. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of peated whiskies. I don't like the heavily peated whiskies where there's an assault of peat, where all you can taste is that iodine, salty kind of note. This is heavily peated, yes, but it's also heavily sweet, so that kind of keeps it in balance, at least for me. Some Islay whiskies, they can have that iodine, medicinal kind of formaldehyde, band-aid, rubbery smell, rubbery taste as well. This here, none of that. Heavily peated, a lot of earthy notes coming through, but also quite sweet, so very nice. So I'm gonna go in again, but I'm gonna focus on the finish and see how all those flavors develop and fade off. Cheers. Okay, again, as I was saying, you get that kind of earthy hit up front, a little bit of a minty kind of herbal tingle, kind of fresh herbs coming through. That sweetness is there, that richness is there. As it kind of fades off, that earthy, the peat smoke is what hangs on the longest, as you'd expect from a heavily peated whiskey like this. But I'm also getting a little bit of like oak spice, a little bit of a kind of a not like a clove, not like a cinnamon. There's definitely a bit of spiciness coming through here, probably that oak spice from the cask influence coming through at the end, a little bit of spiciness. The alcohol, like I said, it was well incorporated in the nose, well incorporated in the palate, and into the finish, it's well incorporated. It's warming. It's not giving you a heavy kind of like a burn or that kind of uncomfortable feeling. It's nice, it's warming. It's well incorporated, I think, throughout the entire character of the whiskey. That doesn't mean it's overpowering, but it does mean it delivers a lot of flavor. As I'm breathing, as I'm kind of enjoying the finish on the whiskey, I'm getting a little bit of like a caramelized brown sugar note has come back up. I always kind of something like this always reminds me of that kind of a creme brulee, where you get that top of the creme brulee with the brown sugar where it's been toasted. But I imagine that's not just been toasted, but it's been like burnt. It's been heavily kind of charred, still sweet, but still smoky. And that's what I would describe this whiskey as, sweet and smoky. It's not a smoky whiskey like you're gonna get from some Islay distilleries. It's not gonna be an overpowering, heavy, smack you in the face with a piece of peat. It's gonna be a nice, sweet one. I wouldn't recommend this for a beginner to peat because it is so smoky, it is so overpowering. The regular Blackpitts is good if you're kind of looking to get into peat because, like I said, it had that Sauternes wine cask, had more of that fruity note, and it was distilled 3 times, so it's better for getting into peat. This is much more peat. If you like the Blackpitts, you will probably find a lot more in the cask strength Blackpitts that you like. That vanilla just coming from the bourbon, nice and fresh, still lets you get the fruitiness from the malt, from the barley coming through without being, in a different direction like that pineapple note you get in the other one, which is still a very nice whiskey, but this focuses in on the peat, focuses in on the smoke, and for that I actually do appreciate this whiskey. So what do you think? Have you ever tried the Blackpitts or the Blackpitts Big Smoke? Let me know down below what you think of it. If there's another Irish whiskey that is peated that you think is very good, let me know and I might just review it next. I put out whiskey reviews on Wednesdays, I put out cocktail recipes on Fridays, and I'll have a cocktail recipe featuring this Friday. So if you want to see that, make sure you scroll down, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you then. Sláinte.